Thank you guys for tuning in today and welcome to another episode of Know Your Stuff, an educational program that examines societal concepts, definitions with historical context. My name is Zain Raza. Today I'll be talking to Dr. Michael Shermer, the founding publisher of the Skeptic Magazine, a presidential fellow at the Chapman University where he also teaches a course called Skepticism 101. He's also a best-selling author and his latest book is called Heavens on Earth, The Scientific Search for the Afterlife, Immortality, and Utopia. Dr. Michael Shermer, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Nice to be here. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. So let's get straight to it. I listened to your recent audio lecture called Conspiracies and Conspiracy Theories, What We Should and Shouldn't Believe and Why. And I was really taken by the in-depth that you went when it comes to the mode of thinking, the conditions that on which these type of thinking thrives on. So before we get into the mode of thinking, which I primarily want to talk to you about today, could you first define conspiracies or conspiracy theories and also provide us a bit of historical context regarding this term?
Yeah, so conspiracy is just two or more people plotting in secret to do something to a third party or the public to gain an unfair or illegal advantage. A conspiracy theory is a structured belief system about a conspiracy, whether it's true or not. A conspiracist is somebody who thinks that there's a conspiracy afoot. And so that's all in the first lecture of my Audible course, Conspiracies and Conspiracy Theories. Historically, well, I got interested in the subject really since I've been in college, since I was a young man. It was back in the 70s. There are all sorts of conspiracy theories about the end of the world and the late great planet Earth was, a hugely popular book about all the things that were going on in the Middle East as foretelling the end of the world as described in the last book of the Bible and so on. And that kind of opened up a window to me of all these other conspiracies. So I've always been interested in it. And then when we started Skeptic Magazine in 1992, pretty much every issue has something about conspiracies because people want to know, is it true or not? And it's not like the paranormal or ESP or perpetual motion machines that can't be true. Conspiracies do happen a lot, all the time. And so the question is that particular conspiracy theory you're interested in, is that one true or not? And so there's no general theory that says, here we know for sure 100% whether a conspiracy theory is true or not. It depends on each one. So, JFK assassination, 9/11, Watergate, whatever. I mean, they're, maybe true, maybe not, depends on each of them. And so my course kind of goes through some of the different criteria of how we distinguish between true and false conspiracies. For example, the more people that have to be involved to pull off a conspiracy, the less likely the theory about it is true, simply because the more complex the system, the more people screw up, or the more they talk, they can't keep a secret, that sort of thing. The more elements that have to come together in just the right sequence at the right time for the conspiracy to happen, the less likely the theory about it is to be true. The more global and overreaching the conspiracy theory, the less likely it is to be true. Most real conspiracies in business and politics are very narrow, like the Volkswagen conspiracy to cheat the standards set by the EU for emissions. That's a conspiracy. But of course, everybody thinks, well, of course, they cheated to make money. Yeah, no kidding. That's a typical conspiracy. Or a politician that rigs an election or does something nefarious with public money. That's usually what happens. I mean, Watergate was a typical conspiracy, just to break into the Democratic headquarters to find out what they're up to. And they couldn't even pull that off. So the idea that there's, the Illuminati, these 12 people in London that run the world, very unlikely to be true.
So before we dig deeper into the mode of thinking, I just want to stick to the term conspiracy for a second, because this term is used regularly, like the term fake news, to discredit dissidents or activists or people that are questioning, let's say, authority. For example, if before the Snowden revelations, if people would have said something like, hey, that the NSA is collecting your data and surveilling us on a global scale and its allies, it could have been easily dismissed as being a conspiracy. So why is the scientific community using this term conspiracy, why don't we use another term, for example, not scientific truth or something like along that
Yeah.
lines?
Yeah, it's a good question, really. But what people were saying was, oh, that's just a crazy conspiracy theory. In fact, it was an actual conspiracy that we now know is very likely to be true from these documents that Ed Snowden revealed in the WikiLeaks. It turned out that it started under the Bush administration, but carried on under the transparent, liberal, Democratic administration of Barack Obama. So it's not just one political party that conspires to do things, and of course, it's all under the name of national security. There really are terrorists. The terrorists around the world really are conspiring to do nefarious things. Yes, that's all true, but then the conspiracy theory that government was spying on us to try to catch these terrorists, that theory turned out to be true. And I mean, in many disturbing ways, as Ed Snowden showed, they had this program in which I could take over your laptop and I could see what you're looking at right now, and so just like that camera hole right there, it's like, what? And then shortly after that happened, we saw Mark Zuckerberg, testifying before Congress. He's got his laptop there with a piece of duct tape over the hole so that nobody can see. I mean, it's like, holy crap, this stuff is real. So that's an example of what I'm talking about. That's a real conspiracy, but it's very pinpointed and targeted. The reason they've conspired to do this is because so again, a conspiracy, it's in secret without the public knowledge or permission. They didn't think they could get search warrants from judges. So this is what's called warrantless searches. Normally, for a search, you have to get a warrant from a judge saying there's probable cause why we have to tap this guy's phone lines or whatever. So warrantless wiretapping is essentially what's been going on. If we ask Congress for permission to do this, there's no way they're going to say okay. But we need to do it anyway, So that's the moment the conspiracy begins. That particular theory turned out to be true. So I call this constructive paranoia. That is, there are certain conspiracies that it's constructive to be paranoid about because there's a chance they could be true. So it's better to err on the side of a little paranoia, a little caution that something nefarious may be up. And you'll notice the way we're talking about this is conspiracy theories have a negative valence to them. No one ever talks about the conspiracy to make the world a better place, a safer place, a richer place or whatever. And it has been, but it's just been done incrementally without any conspiracy. But when bad things happen, there's often somebody behind it. And therefore, we should be paranoid about that.
Let me pick up on that because that's exactly what you talked about in your audio lecture. The evolutionary past that shapes our modern psychological mindset today. So talk about what mechanisms and situations our ancestors were in the past that led to constructive conspiracism, as you call it. And talk about why we developed this negativity bias, which basically means that we tend to believe more in the negative outcomes than the positive ones.
Yeah, well, so the evolutionary logic is that there's more ways for things to go wrong than to go well. And therefore, it pays to be a little paranoid, a little negative. It pays to be hyper vigilant about bad things that could happen, predators that might be hiding behind the bushes, storms and disasters or diseases or contagions. So we know that that bad is stronger than good, this negativity bias, that we have more words for negative emotions than positive emotions. Our senses and our brain is more attuned to negative things that happen. Negative things that happen leave a longer trace in memory. Negative things that happen have a longer term effect on the next day or the next week in terms of your mood than positive things. And the list just goes on and on. We are hardwired to pay attention to bad news, which is why the media is much more inclined to report bad things that happen. No one stands out there with a camera crew in front of a school and says, there was no shooting here today. Isn't it great? No, of course not. Their job is to report the bad news. Why? Because that's what we care about. We care about all the ways that could take us out of the gene pool, which is why all those Darwin Award videos are so funny, because Now, these are the stupid things that people do that take them out of the gene pool, and why we're hyper vigilant about avoiding that. So the evolutionary logic is that we evolved to be hyper vigilant about predators, dangerous things, even when they're not true, because the cost of making a type 1 error is different than the cost of making a type 2 error. That is, making a type 1 error, a false positive. I thought something was dangerous and it turned out it wasn't. It doesn't cost you anything. But to make the other kind of error, a false negative, that is, you fail to recognize that the rustle in the grass was a dangerous predator, you're lunch. So we're tuned to negative things. And that's why conspiracy theorizing is always has a negative valence to it. It's always somebody is up to something no good, and we got to be vigilant about it.
Do you think I'm not a psychologist, but I'm trying to break it down psychologically. Don't you think this is also constructive conspiracism when people get attuned to some, for example, the flat earth theory, because it's a form of projectionism. Some way they have to find a way to cope with a childhood trauma, for example, something happened in school or something major accident happened, and conspiracy theories kind of find a way to project those traumas onto something else, and it helps to cope with these deep-rooted traumas. Could it be also, what has your research or your observations shown?
Yep, that's part of it. So the explanation for why people believe conspiracies is multi-causal. There's multiple effects going on. That's one of them. What you've described is something like feeling out of control, feeling anxious, feeling like I can't predict what's going to happen. Something bad could happen to me. And therefore, having a conspiracy to explain it, a conspiracy theory, that to kind of make sense of the chaos of the world is very comforting. It feels right. It feels good. So we know, like in experiments where you put subjects in conditions in which they feel anxious or out of control, or you just ask them, remember a time when things in your life were going bad, are more likely to see patterns in illusory, dot patterns or something like that. They'll see a meaningful pattern. So I call it patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise. When you're anxious or out of control, you're more likely to see these illusory patterns. There's another phenomenon called cognitive dissonance, where we want the size of the event to be matched by an equally sized cause. So if you think about the Holocaust, the worst genocide in human history caused by the Nazis, the worst political regime in history, there's kind of a balance there. Yeah, that makes sense. But if you think about like JFK, the leader of the free world, the most powerful person on earth, is taken down by who? Lee Harvey Oswald, some lone nut. There's a lack of harmony there, a dissonance, a cognitive dissonance. There's not a match. So you got to add things. You got to add elements to Lee Harvey Oswald. Oh, the FBI and the CIA and the Cubans and the Russians and the KGB and President Johnson, they were all in on it. And that kind of matches it. It's like Princess Diana, cause of death: drunk driving, speeding, no seatbelt. These are the three most common causes of automobile deaths in the world. But princesses aren't supposed to die of common causes, right? So there's a dissonance. So the MI5 and MI6 and the royal family and the Arabs, and they were all in on it. Or 9/11, 19 guys with box cutters defeated the great United States military. Well, but this is so there's a dissonance there. We got to add who else was in on it. So those are some of the psychological effects that are going on.
The 9/11 part is very interesting. What I ask myself is, I haven't researched, but I know that there's an organization called Architects and Scientists or something that are working, and they're working on studies and stuff like that. And I think they're digging up something on World Trade Center 7. And I'm not research into this whole both sides, but what I ask myself, why isn't the government approaching them and saying, hey, let's have a public discussion, and reason, in my opinion, will prevail in that part. Is there not a fault, let's say, on the government or any other public institution for not being transparent enough, or what has your observations shown?
Maybe not transparent enough, but not in the way 9/11 truthers think. They think it was an inside job. They think either MIHOP or LIHOP. Either Bush made it happen on purpose, MIHOP, or let it happen on purpose, LIHOP. I don't think it's either one of them. I think it's what I call cowhop. capitalized on what happened on purpose. This is how politics really works. Bush didn't know that 9/11 was going to attack, that Al Qaeda was going to attack the United States on 9/11 in New York City and so on. He had tens of thousands of pieces of intel coming to him every week from multiple security agencies talking about Al Qaeda is going to do this, that, and the other, in this place, that place, and the other place, all over the world. Only with hindsight do we look back and go, oh, that's the piece of intel he should have paid attention to. No. But what politicians do when something bad happens is they take advantage of it. So, Iraq, first we invade Afghanistan. We're still there 17 and a half years later. Then we invade Iraq. That was a disaster. But that would not have happened without 9/11. So politicians take advantage, or they capitalized on what happened on purpose. Anyway, so what the government, I think, has not been transparent about is not what 9/11 truthers think. It's more along the lines of the stuff that we were doing to fund Osama bin Laden, to fund Saddam Hussein before they became our bad guys. I mean, our government engages in all sorts of sort of behind the closed doors deals with foreign dictators. There's a famous line I think Roosevelt used that, he's a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. So, I mean, and in the 1960s and 70s, we were up to all kinds of nefarious conspiracies in South American countries to prop up dictators that were more supportive of American interests than they were communist or Russian interests. And we rigged elections. We helped assassinate foreign leaders, all the way to the point where Reagan passed a law in 1984 saying it's against the law to assassinate foreign leaders. Okay, we better not do this in case somebody comes after me. That kind of stuff was going on, right? So what bothers me about the 9/11 truthers is they're missing the real conspiracy, the kind of stuff that really goes on that we really should know about, that Ed Snowden revealed. Like, wait, our government was doing what? Congress didn't approve this. No one knew about this, much less voted on it.
Maybe it's a conspiracy theory that they don't want to reveal the conspiracy because then people will be looking at the right conspiracy.
Well, in a way, I think my guess is some of these political bureaucrats, they like the 9/11 truthers. Like, good, it's a distraction from the bullshit stuff we're really doing.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying this is evidence because we don't have evidence for this, but it reminds me of Hillary Clinton saying we gotta, like WikiLeaks revealed, we gotta build up the bagpiper, I think that's what they call it, candidates like Donald Trump, because Hillary will appear civilized in front of them. But we never know. Let's dig deeper into in your audio lecture. You talk about the tendencies that reinforce belief. You name 10 of them. Could you briefly talk about some of them? Like, you talk about how the brain is a belief system, how it's reinforced by authority, by peers. Could you briefly touch upon them?
Yeah, so in that lecture, in the conspiracy course, I was basically applying a bunch of the principles that I developed in my previous book, The Believing Brain, about why we believe anything. So why do people believe weird things? Because we have to believe things, and we're not very good at discriminating between true things and false things, or real things and or fake things, or weird things. We're just not very good at that. And once you commit to a belief, once you've grasped the connection between A and B, say, the default mode is to default to trust, default to belief. I think it's true. Now, skepticism, okay, I'm not sure if it's true. That's an extra layer, cognitively speaking. It's an extra cognitive load to first grasp the concept and then doubt the concept. That takes more cognitive processing. So it's not that we can't do it. We do it all the time, but it's difficult to do. It's not the first thing that we do. So being skeptical, doubting a claim that you've heard, first you have to grasp the claim, then you default to truth, that it's true, then you have to be skeptical. So that comes after the fact. And that gets reinforced by authorities that talk about it, or trustworthy newspapers like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal you look for. And the problem with the internet is there's no fact checkers on a lot of these websites. So our natural intuitions about trusting authority figures or other people that we know in our group. If you watch conservative talk television or listen to conservative talk radio, they very much depend on, this source comes from our people, our side. oh, well, then I can trust it. Well, okay. So these are some of the things that kick in that cloud our judgment, but not in a broken way. It's not. I talk about this as a feature, not a bug. That is, no one of us can process all the information that's coming to us on any given day. None of us can understand all the different complex systems at work in an economy or a political system. No scientist knows all the other sciences. We kind of trust based on how the system works. I don't understand quantum physics or string theory or cosmology. I just trust my friends that do this for a living, that they've checked each other. And that kind of competitive nature of science leads us to have confidence that the claims we hear are true. So in a way, I rely on authorities. I rely on my friends at Harvard and Caltech when they tell me, oh, this stuff about quantum physics is true. I'm like, okay, what do I know? I can't go check it. Can't even do the math, much less run the experiment. So, a lot of that is normal. It's good. It's more efficient. It's effective for communication, for just kind of getting through the day. But that's what opens us up to somebody who appears to be an authority has a false claim, and we accept it without checking. And then we wring our hands. Oh, how come there was no fact checking there? Well, there's not a lot of fact checking normally. It's only after things go wrong that we wring our hands about that.
You mentioned anxiety and loss of control as one of the conditions for an individual. Not necessarily, but it increases tendency to be attracted to conspiracy theories. If I could break that down on a social level, for example, I'm from Pakistan and there's a lot of anxiety. The social conditions, economically speaking, are very dire for the majority of the people. And if I go on the street, I wouldn't say everybody, but there's a large number of people who would say the Jews ruled the world, or it's the devil that's behind the dollar or something like that. And you hear these sort of theories. And this is why I ask shouldn't scientists be focusing on the conditions also of economic conditions, talking about more like socialist policies, like a basic income or higher wages or something like that, because that would take away the, what you call the ground, the legwork, it would take away let me find the correct word, the fertile soil on which conspiracy theories flourish. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I love that phrase, the fertile soil for conspiracy theories. Absolutely. Yeah, so economic hardship and stress makes people a little more conspiratorial. But again, not in necessarily a wrong way, because a lot of wealth inequality is the result of a system that's kind of rigged in favor of the rich. The rich get richer, the so-called Matthew effect. It's true. And, most of it's legal, but not all of it. And a day doesn't go by where there isn't somebody busted for insider trading. That's illegal. Or some CEO that was embezzling funds or illegally doing something with the corporate money, or a politician that, was using public funds for private private needs. That happens all the time. So when people are sort of conspiratorially paranoid about what the government or companies are doing in poor countries like Pakistan, there's probably a good reason for that. There is a lot of corruption in both business and politics in a lot of these countries like yours, or in Ukraine, for example. Russia before Putin, you kind of understand why they turned to Putin, a strongman that was going to clean up all the corruption, because there was so much corruption. And so poor people that were not in on the system, they were right to be paranoid about that. So again, back to where we started, it's an evolved cognition that we should be paranoid, sort of conspiratorially paranoid, because it happens enough that you should be on the alert for that.
Let's move to the solution aspect of this conversation as we get into the end. How can an individual that encounters someone that has all the cognitive biases and is highly emotional start a discussion? And probably you have experienced this, that when sometimes the discussion gets very heated, there's a sense that you're being arrogant. That's what I've heard most of the time when I try to advocate for science and critical thinking and independent thinking. I've heard this argument, well, who are you to say this, So what is the best approach when we're talking about face-to-face discussions? What should be the premise?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's the hardest one. What do we do about all this? Well, first of all, check out the cover story of this issue of Skeptic, which is we are not living in a post-truth world. It's written by Steven Pinker from Harvard. So all hope is not lost. Actually, we're not living in a post-truth world. We still depend on reason and science and argumentation. In fact, Steve opens the article by saying, "Is the statement we're living in a post-truth world true?" So if you claim it is, then you've just lost the argument because you're making an argument. So we still depend on argumentation and reason and logic and facts and evidence. They still matter. So first, you can counter somebody's claim or challenge them with facts. And the backfire effect, which says that you can't do that because people just double down on their beliefs, has not been replicated. It's probably not true for the most part. People do respond to reasonable arguments and facts when they're made in a certain way. Now, what way is that? First of all, show respect for the person you're talking to. See if you can rephrase or restructure in your own words the argument that they're making so that first you understand it, and second that they understand that you're listening. And that shows respect. Everybody wants to be respected. Nobody thinks they're a quack or stupid. No one joined a cult. People join groups that they think are good. No one thinks they're a pseudoscientist, right? So you got to acknowledge, like, I understand your position, or tell me more, or how did you arrive at that belief? Just asking genuinely curious questions in a non-threatening way. The moment you attack somebody, the wall goes up, cognitive dissonance kicks in. They're not listening anymore. They're just waiting for you to shut up so they can counter your argument with their own argument. That's not a conversation. It's not a dialogue. It's a monologue. So we have to avoid that. Leave emotion out of it. The moment you feel yourself getting heated up, you just go, calm down, Shermer, calm down, count to 10 in your head. Just say something nice. It's hard to do when you're upset. And everybody feels that way, but you got to do it. Don't accuse somebody, oh, you're just a denier, or you're a climate denier. That's like being a Holocaust denier. You're a racist. You're a white supremacist. You're a bigot, misogynist, whatever. That's going to end the conversation. And no ad Hitlerum. The moment you accuse somebody of being Hitler or a Nazi, conversation's over. We've come so far in the last 3/4 of a century since the end of World War II. There's nobody who's really Hitler today. Except for some third world dictator or something maybe. But, the person you're talking to in college or your workplace over immigration or abortion or whatever, you're not talking to Hitler. So don't call him that, because that's not conducive to good conversations. And, and then asking just simple questions like that's really interesting. What would it take to change your mind? Give me an example of, like if I showed you something, you'd go, oh, I see. And I'll try to do the same. And then then the person feels like, okay, so this guy's really listening to what I'm saying. He really wants to know. And it sort of forces people to think it through. And anyway, so those are some of the just kind of the basics of having a rational conversation. I do this for a living, so I've tried lots of things. The emotion thing doesn't work. I know because from experience.
So having a lot of endurance, respect, and patience, is that a good way to sum it up?
That's right. Yeah, patience. That's right. And and also it's okay to just not convince somebody. Just don't have your goal like I'm going to talk this person out of being a climate denier or an anti-vaxxer or whatever. The goal should be I just want to understand where they're coming from, and maybe plant a little seed in their head like of doubt, like, that's really interesting, but just maybe just think about this little thing over here, and just kind of leave that, And again, if you challenge people with a threat to their deep worldview that they hold, like I used to say this about creationists and creation evolution debate. If you give somebody a choice between Darwin and Jesus, they're not picking Darwin. If they're a devoted Christian, they're not going to give up Jesus. That's their whole worldview for this Darwin guy, right? No, you don't have to give up anything. Keep your Jesus, keep Christianity. I'm just telling you, maybe God used evolution as a way to create life. Maybe just think about that because of all this interesting stuff over here. So you take that off the table. Like when I'm dealing with climate deniers or climate skeptics, it's like this has nothing to do with capitalism, free markets, economics. This has to do with parts per million of CO2 gases, melting ice sheets, and so on. Just talk about that and just say you can. I'm a free market guy too. Okay, let's see if we can find green solutions that enrich people and make the world a better place and the environment better. So you got to take that off the table, because when right-leaning people hear climate change, they hear attacks on capitalism, attacks on free markets. They're not listening to the scientific debate at all. It has nothing to do with that for them. For them, it's an attack on their political or economic ideologies.
My last question, are you satisfied the way our educational system, our meaning in the United States, from your perspective, are you satisfied the way they're going with all of this when it comes to rational discussions, skeptical and critical thinking? And if not, what would you like to see change?
Well, first of all, we, in addition to Skeptic Magazine, we also publish Junior Skeptic Magazine for young adults and middle school, high school. So we have our own outreach program that way. No, I'm not terribly satisfied with the American system. I'm not sure what the problem is, because if you look at the amount of money we spend per student compared to the amount of money spent per student in many European countries, they're way ahead of us. So it's not like, or they're way ahead of us in outcomes, but they don't spend more money. So it's not just the money, there's something else. And it's not that these Europeans are doing so well because they're all privatized. No, they have public schools. Well, we have public schools. How come our public schools are so crappy? Okay, maybe they're more homogeneous and we're more heterogeneous and larger. I don't really know what the problem is. I do like the idea of school choice. There's private schools, charter schools, public schools. I think everybody should have an education. It's almost like universal health care, universal education. I don't know if I call it a right, but it's certainly a necessity for the 21st century, for any nation to have all of its citizens 100% literacy, and literacy in not just reading, but in mathematics, in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. You got to have all of those for sure. And so what I'm most encouraged about is all the online options now. Now, I'm not in favor of getting rid of brick and mortar colleges and universities and all that. I think there's much value to going to a campus, sitting in a classroom, engaged with conversation with professors and other students and all that. But the options online of, like the Teaching Company and their great courses, or all the MOOCs and online courses from universities, audible.com and all their audiobooks, and just the endless YouTube instructional videos and documentaries and Hulu and Netflix. They all have, I could sit here for 24/7 watching documentaries and just learning stuff. It's unbelievable. Free, or mostly free, or close to free. So the idea that even you graduate from college, you're done with your education. Actually, you've just begun. And that was true when I graduated from college in the 70s. It's way more true now because there's just so many options. To me, that's encouraging. I've also noticed the shift in, the average person understands much better evolution, the Big Bang Theory, cosmology, because there's just been endless television shows about these subjects. People know about the multiverse, string theory. It's like, what? That's crazy. But people know about it, because there's television shows about it, like Big Bang Theory. It was a hugely popular television show, all centered on physics. It's like, wow, who could have imagined that? So I'm encouraged by just the diversity of content that's available everywhere, almost free, or most of it free, to anybody with an internet connection.
Dr. Michael Shermer, best-selling author and founding publisher of the Skeptic Magazine, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me on.
And thank you guys for tuning in today. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel by clicking on the YouTube button below, and to donate so we can continue to produce independent and non-profit news and analysis. My name is Zan Raza. See you guys next time.